Let's talk about them one by one. First, a federal judge in Texas last week threw out a Biden administration ban on non-compete agreements that was due to take effect next Wednesday. Several major players in hospitality, including groups representing the hotel and restaurant industries, had staunchly opposed the Federal Trade Commission rule. The government could appeal the ruling, as Crystal Knowles reports.
Starting a new job can be exciting, the beginning of a new chapter. But what happens when that future involves an industry such as the hospitality and tourism sector, where non-competes are widely used? Non-competes are also standard in the broadcasting industry. Longtime journalist Valerie Boy.
As a reporter, I would sign a contract and then I would have a non-compete, meaning I would have to stay out for 6 months if I decided to leave the station or not renew my contract. And so I think it's a really great thing to get rid of the non-competes.
In April, the Federal Trade Commission created a rule that would do just that. The FTC's Douglas Farrar says the new rule aimed at giving lower wage earners a fighting chance at a time when the cost of living is so high.
Wages put back into millions of Americans' pockets. We're talking about over $500 a year.
According to the FTC, about 18% of U.S. workers have non-competes, which is about 1 in 5 people, and those industries can range anywhere between the medical all the way to the hospitality industry. According to the Economic Policy Institute, between 15 and 25% of hospitality workers are subject to one. In Central Florida alone, there are about 270,000 workers in the tourism industry. Industry groups, including the Restaurant Association, are not on board with the FTC rule, claiming it will reduce competition. During a recent congressional meeting, Republican Dave Joyce questioned the FTC's authority to ban non-competes, paving the way for what was to come next.
Under what statutory authority did the FTC issue the final rule prohibiting non-compete agreements and essentially nullify such contracts between employees and employers across the country?
The FTC Act prohibits unfair methods of competition, and the FTC has determined that non-compete clauses constitute unfair methods of competition, and so that was the authority that we did this under.
The U.S. Chamber of Commerce filed a lawsuit joined by 2 Texas business groups, executives, and a tax firm, challenging the ban. And just last week, a federal judge in Texas blocked the FTC rule just days before it was set to take effect. Here's what Farrar said sometime before the ruling and what the game plan would be if the FTC did not prevail in the courts.
There will be appeals processes if we somehow don't win. Also, Congress has the ability to pass laws. And in fact, several members of Congress have proposed non-compete bans similar to the one we proposed. And on a bipartisan way, those members of Congress, the senators who wrote those bills, have endorsed the FTC's actions and our legal authority to carry this forward.
Crystal Knowles reporting. Okay, Nick, let me start with you on this one. Why does the hospitality industry, like the restaurant and lodging sectors, say it's opposed to these FTC rules on non-competes?
Yeah, the industry groups say that these don't apply to the line workers, the people who are working in the restaurants and the front and back of house. They mostly apply to the executives who know the secret sauce. And they don't want that getting out. They don't want necessarily anybody being able to take trade secrets or proprietary information from one organization to another. So that's their justification behind this.
Yeah, Curtis, I wanted to ask you about a separate case in the Villages. A judge ruled against the FTC in this case as well. Just tell us about that.
So essentially, Steve, here what they're looking for, they're trying to protect their interest here, and what's kind of what they say they proud the company on since it was founded back in the 80s, and they don't want, any former sales associates or workers who work with them to be able to just start immediately being able to sell real estate in the area. There is a 24 non-compete that they want in place, that is in place, and they want to keep that there so that they can't just immediately go across the street. It's similar to what we see in broadcast. I mean, I've been in the TV news business for about 15 years or more, and pretty much every contract I've signed, there's a non-compete agreement in there where I can't just go across the street if for some reason I lose my employment. I have either, whether it be depending on the contract, 6 months to a year. One contract I think I remember was 2 years, where you have to wait a period of time so that you're not taking those quote unquote, as we mentioned earlier, the trade secrets from one shop to another and taking advantage on a market.
I want to pivot to a couple of other issues in the tourism sector if I can. Both the presidential candidates have said that they favor ending taxes on tips. Workers seem to like it, right? But economists don't. Do we have an idea about how such a move might affect the economy in Florida?
Yeah, I would say at the outset it wouldn't have much of an effect because this would be federal taxes, so it wouldn't affect the economy of the Florida government. On a long term, what some economists are saying, it might affect income into the federal government of $10 billion to $25 billion a year, which those cuts would have to come from somewhere to make up that shortfall. So those might be federal programs or something along those lines. There's also a question of whether that applies to payroll tax, and whether the tips would still be taxed there for Social Security and Medicare as well. It's another long-term issue.
I mean, it's really interesting that both the presidential candidates have got on this issue. Do you think it's smart politics, Steve?
It is popular with folks like initially, like, oh yeah, no taxes on tips. It's like I said, economists are sort of wary about the idea, but I guess the idea is just get through the election and then worry about that afterwards. So the other side doesn't have an advantage on that. But there's a lot of question about will this impact California that has higher minimum wages and people's incomes are less more wage and less tips out there. Will it hurt them as opposed to places with a lower wage and like higher tips? Social security taxes, things like that. There's also the issue of what counts as like a tip. There's worries that if you're a financial advisor, instead of taking like a straight percentage or something like that, oh no, just tip me. What can be a tip? It's essentially, a lot of people will be, if there are no taxes on tips, will essentially just be taking much less salary and like a lot more in just tips. So that's the thing that really has to be looked at a lot.